This is ASTROPILLED number 13, and we are welcoming back Dan with us to look at his solar return chart and look at the year ahead, maybe do a little bit of contemplation on the year behind. My name is Wei, or Sadal, or Saddle Sood, whatever you'd like. I'm a software engineer, architect, and manager, and I've been doing that for about 10 years, but roughly 4 years ago, I picked up astrology, thought it was nonsense, and then dug really deep, and then just fell down the rabbit hole. And now I'm doing this. Maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer, but I also fell in love with astrology a few years ago and was torn away from my scientific materialist worldview. And I haven't looked back. I'm really excited to be looking at a longer period of time today. This kind of solar return thing is different than what we've usually done. And so that's a really fun challenge for me. And I'm really excited to get into things we haven't talked about yet, like perfection years and secondary progressions. So this is going to be a really exciting episode for me, for sure.
Yeah, heck yeah. So Dan, you've been on the show before. Welcome back. I'd love to hear, what you're hoping to get out of this second run, as we're going to take a look at your chart now that you've had a little bit more experience, you've had a birthday, and we're, what are you hoping to get out of this?
I don't know. Perfectly honest answer.
Yeah.
My birthday was last week. It was on September 29th.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose that's what a solar return is, right? We get one per year.
Exactly. It is the precise time that your chart, that the sun returns the same location it was in your chart. So let me actually tweak this to be exact.
That's not really possible, though, because all of the stars in the sky are moving around the galaxy.
Right. So it doesn't come back to the exact location. It comes back to the... it doesn't return to the same location at the same time that you were born because of precession. So usually you actually end up having the time be a little bit before your actual birth time precisely. So here, for example, you can see I'm tweaking the time to move the sun, so it's actually at the exact time, or the exact location of your natal sun at 6 degrees and 48 minutes is close enough. But your actual birth time is a little bit later than what we've got here. And that's because of how precession works. So maybe, do you remember who's leading this time? Because I do not recall.
No, I don't remember either.
Okay. I think it was me last time, so I'll let you kick off. Maybe just refresh the natal chart, and then I can sort of dig into the system of perfections, of returns, and how we think about it.
Yeah, sounds good. So Dan's big three, his sun, moon, and rising, are in Libra, Sagittarius, and Capricorn, respectively. It was really interesting. If you go back and watch our earlier episode with Dan, we learned that this chart is actually the result of a rectification. So another astrologer was able to help Dan narrow down his birth time to get the chart that we see in the middle of this chart that you're looking at on our Twitch stream now. I remember also finding that Dan's Mercury was a really prominent part of his chart. It's in a really strong position, and it really enjoys being in Virgo. So that, I think, is a placement that we'll be returning to a lot today as well. Venus in Scorpio is another placement that I find really interesting in Dan's birth chart. Venus in Scorpio is kind of like the goth girl of Venus placements. Think, I want to go on a date at a graveyard and have a picnic and drink I don't know, eat a black ice cream cone or something. That would be very Venus and Scorpio kind of vibes. The moon in Sagittarius, also in the 11th house in Dan's birth chart, relates a lot to his Twitter presence for me. I think that he's kind of got his social butterfly come out when he's on Twitter, to the extent that he would identify as having a social butterfly, and to have that come out in a
in the last year that's kind of collapsed, unfortunately.
I mean, I think that a lot of us would probably relate to you there. It's interesting that you say that, because I do imagine a moon in Sagittarius would find the lack of mobility and freedom that we've experienced over the past 18 months particularly frustrating. So I'm not surprised that you felt that way. I think that we also in the earlier episode talk a lot about the interesting aspects. There's kind of sets of three aspects, these conjunctions opposing each other, along with trines and sextiles. So if you want to get into Dan's birth chart in greater detail, I really recommend going back and looking at that episode, because it is a really interesting chart to dig into more deeply. But I think this is probably a good little TLDR to support our solar return chart reading today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into that. So this is actually a very special episode of AstroPilled, because this one is almost going to be exclusively about prediction. In a lot of ways, we'll do plenty of reflection throughout, but a solar return chart is a chart that is cast for the exact moment that the sun returns to its natal location. And as Dan pointed out, it's not actually the exact time due to the slow precession of the stars and the fact that the Earth's rotation essentially slips. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the solar return chart and compare it to Dan's natal chart, and that is how we will know that's how we're going to look at the themes that are most likely to show up for Dan's year. So what we've got here is a little bit of a more complex display, where in the middle we have Dan's natal chart, and then in the very center, and then in the middle between both these charts, we have the progress chart. And the progress chart is actually a chart where you take the number of years that you've been alive and you cast a chart for that many days after the fact. So if you've been alive for 25 years, then you actually cast it, and you're born January 1st, you cast a chart for January 25th. And then that is what you look at. And so the progressions are used to track much more long-term sorts of motions and experiences that we have as they evolve. And then the solar return, which is just a picture of the sky at the time that that sun does return to that point, is a picture of just the sky. And we use that in comparison to both the progression and the natal chart. So to dig in, the last piece that we need is also to think about the perfection year. So there's another system which is an ancient Hellenistic system, and let me just pull up this chart real quick just to show y'all what it looks like. But basically, every year that you're alive, depending on where your ascendant is, and Dan, we know that his ascendant is in Capricorn. It works quite well for the last reading, so we'll continue to use that. But Dan, when you were first born, you were in a first house perfection year when you were 0 years old, and then when you turned 1, you entered a second house perfection year, and then it just kind of goes all the way around. So based on how old you are now, you're actually in a second house perfection year right now, or you recently, entered into your second house perfection year after your birthday.
So this is there are 12 houses, and profections go in a modulo 12. So I'm now wrapped around to
exactly
the fourth trip around houses. Mm-hmm. I'm now on the. So you say it starts indexing from 0. What's a 0 with house?
So it's the first house, but it's your 0th year of life. Because in Western culture, when you're born, you're 0 years old, then you turn 1. So they're off by 1 numerically. So when looking at this, typically we want to look at the ruler of the second house in order to say, okay, this is what your year is largely going to be like thematically. So you have an empty second house, so we want to look at the ruler. Ordinarily, you would look at, say, the houses that are inside, the planets that are inside of the second house in order to know sort of what the major themes are, because it's kind of like, you have a ruler of a house, but the ruler isn't home right now. So it's really the people who are there who decide what the house is going to be like this year. But because you don't have anybody at that house currently, we look at your ruler, which is Jupiter. So Jupiter in your chart is actually in your 12th, in your first house by whole sign. And actually, let me tweak this chart so that it is in whole sign, because that does matter for these sorts of charts. whole signs. There we go. Say, yep. And then we will pull up that and then look at the page again. Okay, sweet, perfect. So Jupiter lives in your first house by whole sign. So this year overall is going to take on more likely. Oh, actually, I was wrong. Because we were in Placidus, when we switched to whole sign, we saw that your second house is actually ruled by Saturn. So that's actually that's one of the big differences between Placidus and whole sign, where Placidus you can have houses to be intercepted, which is they're completely consumed by a house so that they actually never are on a house cusp. But in whole sign, we always get one sign per house. So you'll be entering into a second house year. But to make sure that we've got this correct, like, let me just ask you a little bit, how would you say the last year you had was? Like, what was sort of the major focus in your perception? What sort of things did you go through?
Let's see. We're talking about just the period between September 2020 and September 2021. September 2020 was kind of catching myself from a fall that really began in sort of March of 2020 and went all the way up through September. Where just pandemic started and various other elements of my life just collapsed one after the other. And I sort of caught myself and broke the fall in September. So most of the theme of this last year has been kind of keeping a low profile, keeping my head down and rebuilding. That was especially the case in terms of my professional life, where I started a new job where I still am and doing well at this job last September. So I just passed my 1-year anniversary at the company. And similarly, like, had some housing instability, not the least of which was related to moving across the country in the middle of a pandemic. But, just like I lived in 3 different apartments in 4 months during that sort of the rough period, and moved into the apartment I'm still in now actually it was in July, but the first 2 months I was there, so July and August, going into the beginning of September, felt like hostile because there was a lot of noisy, disruptive construction going outside, like right outside my window. There was scaffolding up and stuff. September was also the period where my home began to feel like a comfortable home again, too. Very much aligned with that theme of rebuilding, finding some stability and comfort after a period of intense instability and discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And what's very interesting about that is that you have you have a lot of stuff in your 12th house. So you've got your moon, your Uranus, your Mars, and your Neptune there. And during the period from, March 2020 until late September 2020, when you had your birthday, you would have actually been in a 12th house profection year. And a 12th house profection year is often related to dissolution as a theme, related to losing things, of needing to reorganize, of needing to prepare for the next phase of life overall. So that's very fitting, especially considering that you have Mars there, and Mars rules your 4th house, and the 4th house generally rules like literally where you live and, how you live it and the space that you're in. So to have Mars activated in this 12th house while all this is happening makes a ton of sense, because Mars also rules, the work that you do and the energy you put out into the world and all of that. So I would say that, with that in mind, this does make sense. And then as you moved into September of 2021, you entered into a Saturn-ruled Capricorn period, which would have been a lot of hard work, but you also had Jupiter there. And Jupiter there is generally just like a positive, benefic force, especially for your chart, because you have a day chart. You're born during the day. And so Jupiter is the benefic of the day sect, so it's kind of like it works in your favor a little bit more than Venus does in your chart. So I love that. And, also a first house profection year is a time to reconnect to who you are, to kind of like rebuild after the effects of the 12th house. It is really the beginning of the next 12-year cycle of life. So, all the things that you say there make a lot of sense. Maybe any thoughts on all of this before I just keep read in the rest?
Just that I've found that of everything I've studied in astrology so far, perfection years are by far the spookiest. I was able to like trace back my own life through my perfection years and found it very, very eerie. And I've been friends with Dan for this 12th house, first house to second house progression for him, and it is very spooky how aligned those years were in terms of endings and beginnings, and now the opportunity to move forward. So I just love it. I love it. I love the spooky feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to just share a quick detail related to Maybe and my friendship and our history of divination too, just to show some synchronicity and alignment here. In the beginning of March of 2020, right at the outset of that 6-month period of just getting absolutely hammered by the world, I asked her to do a tarot reading for me, sort of predict how the next few months were going to go. And she pulled a tower card on me.
Oh.
I should say that I have never ever had a tower card pulled in any other reading I've ever done for myself or anyone has ever done for me. And this was a real tower card. It like just one thing after the other, like my home getting destroyed and then moving across the country and getting sick immediately and going through a lot of emotional turmoil and then getting laid off from my job. And it was a very tower kind of moment. So
wow.
I guess the cards are in agreement with the chart here.
Yeah.
Don't shoot the messenger.
I have not asked her to do another tower reading for me since that.
Yeah.
Love that you said tower reading instead of tarot reading.
Yeah.
Like that's just what you would expect from me. Oh no. Please do not take this as an advertisement of my services in general. I don't pull tower cards on everyone. It's just Dan.
Wow. And with special treatment, huh?
I'm so sorry.
Nice. Yeah.
From now on, I'm checking if people are in a 12th house year before I do readings for them. I'm just going to be like, nope.
Yeah. The 12th house is almost universally rough for people. Especially if you have a lot of stuff there, because it indicates that a lot of things are likely to change or a lot of things are likely to undergo this, transformative process. Because really what the 12th house is about clearing out what came before, of finishing whatever was there due to the, just results of how life and the world has progressed. And it is the point where we need to reintegrate, reorganize, and a lot of the time that comes with letting things go, and a lot of the times it's in a way that we're not necessarily ready for, or that we don't necessarily want, or doesn't seem to have a purpose. But a lot of the time we find that purpose following in the first house years. And so the first house year is very much about, who are you? Who do you become in the world? How do you choose to define yourself for this next cycle? And this can, radiate along any lens of how you view yourself, whether that's like, fashion or style or your work or your, your ethics and values or interests, hobbies, etc. All that stuff is about like who you are in terms of your personal expression. And then as you move into the second house, I always like to go back to Dane Rudyard's sort of child developmental model, where the first house is like, oh, I am a child, I have a body, the first house is I exist, like I have a consciousness, I am here, I realize that I can like participate in this world. And then the next stage after that birth is the second house, which is, oh, I have a body, I have things that I own, I have my own feelings and ideas and what have you. So the second house is all about possessions and things and ownership in general. So it's likely that this is going to be a big year for you in terms of like, what do you have, what do you own, what do you hold on to, what do you let go of. The second house by nature is very accumulative. So there's often a concern of like, do I have enough stuff? Do I have what I need? Oh yeah, Altash says, being 23 / the first 12th house perfection year is infamously horrible. Yeah, it's rough times. So The other things, so the way we look at this is we look at, what's going on in your second house to start, and you've got Saturn there, and Saturn is the ruler of your second house in Aquarius, but you also natally have Aquarius in Scorpio right here. And Saturn is the malefic of the day sect, so you are actually not under such a hard time as you would have been under Mars. And actually, the 12th house with Mars as your out of sect malefic present, just tore your entire life apart, essentially. So Saturn here is another malefic, but Saturn tends to work in a way that is structuring, that is providing, like discipline and responsibility and hard work and duty and all those sorts of themes, which are a little bit less fun, but you also have Jupiter here, which is really good, and the fact that Jupiter and Saturn are both there in Aquarius in your second house suggests that like your property and ownership often has to do with Aquarian-like themes, whether that's opportunities or things, items come from your community, from the people around you, or even like the nature of the things you like to have tend to be eccentric or unusual or futuristic or very like novel, because those are all sorts of Aquarian themes overall. I want to pause there and just ask, like, have you felt this theme coming on so far? Have you been connecting to this idea at all?
Kinda. The thing that you recently said that jumped out to me is most. I want to use the word insightful, but I recognize that it's actually not. It's just a kind of straightforward reporting of the hermeneutical system here. The difference in character between the malefic influence of Mars and Saturn. Mm-hmm. That's kind of interesting, and I'm spending some time kind of mulling that over in my head. Because when I even just think about, even outside of birth charts or specific timing and predictions and stuff, the way the energies feel to me, right? Like, the malefic energy of Mars has always felt like extremely bad to me. It's absolutely the energy of like getting mugged in a back alley, and the malefic energy of Saturn has been like just a lot more manageable. And maybe it's a personality thing, because I despite my weirdness and eccentricity, I'm very normie passing and have always been able to do well in structured institutional life. Like, I work for a big corporation right now. I have no idea how I managed to pull that off, but I guess it's to my benefit a lot of the time. It's just the presence of Jupiter hanging out right next to it. The theme of like this next year being much more Saturnian than Martian, I can kind of see that. Mm-hmm. One of the things that is already coming up around this is it's my second year at the company I'm working for, so I'm much better established and beginning to sort of get a handle for what the theme of the job is. Mm-hmm. Like, just in the last couple of months, I kind of spent a lot of time doing personal integration type work on weird feelings I had about my relationship work. Where earlier in the year, it had just caused me a lot of distress. Mm-hmm. Feeling very disconnected from the job and feeling like, oh my God, I want to quit and change my career. Not because I was under a ton of work stress, and not because I was failing or getting negative reviews or anything. Mm-hmm. Completely internal stuff, just internally originating dissatisfaction, a sense of alienation about it. And having put in a bunch of time into like getting a grip on my internal relationship with work, has started to pay off. I'm really feeling a lot better about it, even though nothing has changed at the job per se. Just my own relationship to it has kind of shifted much more in a direction of being just less like fucked up about it. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that is maybe that kind of Saturnian theme of accepting the job for what it is instead of projecting expectations onto what it ought to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very apt, because like Saturn is very much about like, this is what you got, deal with it. And Mars is all about reaching, aspirations, like inner drive, like all those things at once. So I think that's very accurate. The other interesting thing too, going along this is, well, let me pause. Maybe what are you seeing in this so far?
Well, I definitely relate for one to the difference in texture between the malefics in the chart and the benefics in the chart. Actually, I imagine if you reflected on, the vibe of Jupiter versus the vibe of Venus, you might find a similar kind of disparity in your level of connection to those energies. I think that's really relatable. I'm somebody in a night chart, and so I grapple a lot more with Saturn energy, and I have tons of it in my chart. And it comes across as harsher to me, whereas Mars is the malefic that seems to kind of like have a twisted liking for me, and I can play into its good side and it'll reward me for it. Whereas Saturn, it's like, no, you're frozen out with me. So it's interesting to hear somebody talk about the day chart experience of that disparity. In terms of the progression, the secondary progression chart, one thing that I was really interested in was this conjunction between Vesta and Mercury. I know Mercury is a really influential placement for you, and Vesta is separating by only a couple of minutes from that conjunction. So I was really curious about what that might reflect about the themes of the month. Wei, you're more experienced with reading Vesta, so I was curious if you had any opinions about it.
Yeah, totally. So to tune this in, usually you'll feel the effects of a progressed transit within roughly 30 to 15 minutes, and it actually became exact just around September 1st, beginning of September, and has been sort of progressing. And then prior to that, yeah, it came into range, of 15 degrees, I'd say about mid-February. So
can I just pause you here and ask, which celestial object is Vesta? This is not one of the planets that I know.
Yeah, this one
is... I know who Vesta is in the mythology, but I don't know what Vesta means in astrology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Vesta is an asteroid that is often associated with a female or feminine energy defender of the hearth. Sometimes you can think of it as a feminine leaning warrior spirit that is very community oriented, that's very tied to the land, that's very much about, in other interpretations, you can consider Vesta as, metaphorically guarding a fire is also the inner fire that we have within ourselves. It's sort of like a spiritual motivation, and it is especially the defender energy that we take. Like Mars is very selfish in its nature. Mars wants to accomplish things. It wants to conquer. It wants to kill, win, fight, fuck, all those things for itself. That's what it wants. But Vesta does all of those things, but is actually chaste and is actually focused on the defense of the family or of the community or of, what is sacred. So in combination to Mercury, it would suggest to me that as this progression has been moving over your Mercury, there may be a relationship developing around how you wield your mind and how you wield your thinking powers that relates to these other themes in some way. How does that resonate for you?
I find that your description of the attributes of Vesta in this chart to be a really interesting mashup between what I'm associating with of Greek mythology of Athena
mm-hmm.
and Vesta, or Vesta is one of the three sisters.
Mm-hmm.
As far as her cult has come down into the modern world, vanished. I find this fascinating because Demeter and Hera still have major presences in our social institutions and structures, and our domestic situations have become so atomized and distorted by modernity that the actual thing that Vesta represented, which is keeping the fire burning in the hearth at home, which was 100% a necessity for well-being of Bronze Age family. Was what kept the house warm and inhabitable. The only real way of cooking the food. They didn't have gas lines on tap, right? But it was sort of defended in this, not in the sense of martial defense. That's Athena.
Mm-hmm.
Defended in the sense of domestic stability. A good wife would fire burning, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing it as just a really interesting thing. We're bringing together that theme of Athenian kind of defense, where that's the one where you're sort of defending yourself from enemies without, and you're also doing like ideological battle. I think is a very Athenian.
Yeah.
Whereas with Vesta, I would almost expect it to be like anti-ideological, like it's the most grounded thing. If I want to interpret it according to its name on the chart, then I would say it's like a time for me to be less and less ideological, which is sort of already a theme. I was raised by just a super political family, and it's been a family pastime to discuss politics. And it's become frustrating and annoying and has become an area in which I dislike spending time with my extended family because they are just constantly ranting about whatever the latest talking point that they read in the New York Times is.
Yeah.
Can't help themselves. And I'm now living physically distant from my extended family, most of whom are still in or around New York, a couple of whom are on the West Coast, and I'm in the middle. So I'm unable to really connect to anyone in my family now. And I haven't been back to New York since I moved away. And I had considered taking a trip back to the East Coast to see family right after I got vaccinated a few months ago. And I couldn't do it. I kept like going to the webpage to go buy plane tickets and just staring at it and not clicking the button, being like, oh, there's something inside me that is just saying no. That kind of feels almost like that Vestal defensiveness to me, where I kind of staked out my own home. I left Brooklyn because I didn't have a good reason to be there. Like my entire reason to be there was ancestry. I've sort of grown out of that. So maybe that's one of the themes that's related. It's like actually settling into my chosen home and seeing what I can make of it.
I love that. Yeah. And that is, that distinction, because like there's a bunch of asteroids that you can use. And I do believe there is one that specifically represents Athena, but the distinction that you make between like this Athena energy and this Vesta energy is very important and valuable, which like I did not at all have. So like, you're teaching us at this moment, or at least me. And I love that. It's also interesting too in this chart that coming to the solar return, you also have Vesta very closely conjunct your Venus in your solar return chart. And so there's also this story of, guarding the hearth, protecting the self, finding a home as it relates to Venusian topics of, sensuality, pleasure, sexuality, things like that. And that is likely to be a theme this year as well. Have you felt any inklings of that?
How much do you want to know about my frustrated dating life?
However much you're willing to share on Twitch.
Yeah. I don't know if that shows up in the astrological interpretation of it, but the ancient cult of Vesta had virgin priestesses, very famously, as opposed to the ancient cult of Aphrodite, which most certainly did not.
Yeah. So it's an interesting combination.
Yeah, that is. Our dating life has been really frustrated, actually. I know this is such a tired cliche, but the apps really fucking suck. They're horrible. They're a bad experience for almost everyone. I think every time I mention, like, hey, I tried using Bumble or OkCupid, the first words out of their mouth are always condolences.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's been a point of frustration. I know that I want to be dating more, but I struggle internally with, I don't know, almost a sense of worthiness. Like, I think that I have a lot of really positive qualities. I have a lot to offer, but I have struggled to feel like I'm in a place in my life where I'm doing a good job of offering. There's been a certain kind of closing down that has really happened as a result of that malefic period in 2020, and spent the entire last year just trying to recover from that and lick my wounds and find myself again. And what I found is a different person. There was some kind of self-iteration process that happened throughout all of that. And there's an almost like mourning going on of the person who was really at the top of their game before that malefic period. And it kind of makes sense because that was the very end of the last 12-year cycle in that phase. And there's a sort of mastery that goes along with it. I can also sort of chart the progress there where the period between 24 and 36, like had, a very typical early 20s kind of life collapse right around the time I was about 21 years old. Years between 21 and 23, just pulling my shit together. And when I started that phase at 24, that was actually when I went back to school for computer science and very much started on the track that led to a lucrative career and all kinds of life stability and stuff like that. And by the end of that kind of 12-year cycle, I had established myself in a career and figured out a lot about my own internal mishigas, to use some Yiddish. And came to the end of that cycle feeling like powerful, feeling like I really had a grip on who I was and what I was doing and where I was living, all that stuff. And some of that stuff I changed deliberately because I saw limitations of where I was at. I wanted to move out of the city. I wanted to make some significant changes to certain parts of my social experience. And I wanted to sort of get a better grip on my spiritual life too, which I had very much started exploring at the end of that period in a cringeworthy way that is very typical of kind of spiritual seekers doing an autodidactic, self-motivated kind of a path where you try a lot of stuff. Some stuff you go too far. Some stuff you kind of develop a reek around it, if you know what I mean. I wanted to have more natural feeling, better integrated spiritual practice than a lot of the kind of try-hardism that I was doing before. Those things seem to be developing as expected. The unexpected part is that last person he doesn't live anymore. He's a ghost that lives in my memory.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to learn who this new present version of myself is. There's continuity. It's like I have the memories and I have those life development experiences, but a qualitative texture of what it feels like to be me and live in my world right now has just completely changed. And I feel like a noob all over again. I feel like don't have that mastery that I did at the end of the last cycle.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by I'm struggling to feel like I'm able to offer those good qualities that I have, because I know what they are. I can list them out loud, and whether or not anyone believes me is like a whole other situation. I can say I think that I'm a very trustworthy, honest, caring person. I think that I'm intelligent and I'm interesting. And I think that I can also be, a huge wet blanket, and I can struggle with my negativity bias, and I can be clingy and overly attached. All of these things are certainly not unique problems to me. It's very easy to find, old comfort on the internet with other people who are struggling with their version of them. But it's hard for me to feel like presenting myself in a way that's super appealing. Or I don't know. It's maybe this is sort of the burnout that comes from feeling frustrated about dating on apps, or maybe I should say not dating on apps.
Yeah.
Feeling self-conscious, am I not photogenic enough? Do I not look good? Is that why I'm not getting attention? Or I keep matching with people who we never get past small talk, and I say, am I actually not as interesting as I think I am? Or am I just sort of really judgmental and I'm not meeting people where they're at? I don't know. These are what the struggles feel like right now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear you talk about it this way because we did sort of start out the episode talking about your difficult relationship with Mars. And one of the other things that I really see is this opportunity to, instead of leaning on Mars, maybe lean lunar. I see in the transit chart along the outer ring for your solar return chart, the moon is home in Cancer in the seventh house. And there's this contrast coming to mind of, I would say that the dating app game is a very Martian game. It's very direct. You put yourself out there, you say what you want, and you initiate shit. And Mars is like, let's fucking go. He loves all that shit. But the lunar wants to, I don't know, come on, like a little softer, not quite so strong and direct. The lunar man wants to emerge from the shadows, mysterious and appealing, and draw someone in, instead of doing this more Martian, like, hey, want to go out thing. That the lunar approach thinks that's very gauche or something, like kind of too obvious and doesn't align with what's really being felt and really being offered. Because I relate to that. I relate to that when you say that this isn't working for everyone. You're right that for everyone who wants to offer something like nurturing and companionship and connection and have that lead to intimacy, and then sex comes as the byproduct of that, rather than the Martian thing, which is let's have sex and probably that's it. At most, the dating apps are not leading us down the path of like uncovering the mystery of each other and finding solace and companionship. But the moon would really love to help you do that. And it wouldn't make you go through Mars. It's sitting right there in your seventh house, waiting for you to like come play with the other from this place that's more nurturing. And it connects so much too to me to this Vesta story that's going on with your Mercury and with your Venus in your secondary progressions and in the transits, because it feels like that tells the story of the self-integration that you're going through. I imagine that was something like turning the light on and inviting a bunch of parts of yourself that had been cast out to come home is like the metaphor that comes to mind, from the place of like seeing it like line up with Mercury and Venus at the same time. It was like heart and mind, like inviting maybe some parts of you that had been left behind in the storm of the 12th house year back into your heart and your being. And I imagine that if you were to explore relationships this year, that might be the way you would want to approach it from like an outside perspective too, is maybe you don't have to play the dating app game. Maybe you can come across people and nurture them and get to know them and see if that goes somewhere, in the same way that you've been nurturing yourself and seeing where that goes. Does that resonate at all?
It's a much more natural fit for my style of socializing. It's been hard to do because the pandemic has not ended yet, and a lot of public spaces are still not really back to normal. But I'm also making excuses. It's easy for me to say that and use it as an excuse to not explore what has actually kind of returned to normal. Like this is not the early stage of the pandemic where everyone is like locked down and paranoid. I'm vaccinated, I can go out safely. So yeah, I mean, a lot of that is just I kind of need to push myself to put myself in those situations that are set up to work for me, because the dating app thing is not set up to work for me. I'm not Martian. It's just not how I think about things.
Yeah, I mean, it's both your out-of-sect malefic and it's in your 12th house, and the 12th house in general will tend to show us any planets there often are considered hidden, in that they have trouble expressing themselves fully, because the 12th house is a so-called dark house. it's interesting too that you have your that this moon placement is very strong in this chart overall for the solar return. Like, if you look at the aspects it's making, first of all, in the solar return, the moon as a general technique is very important. So we always look at where the moon is, and it suggests where the mind is likely to be and where sort of the heart is likely to be throughout the year overall, broadly. Whereas the other planets will represent, other areas of our experience. So the moon being in the 7th house is all about relationship. It's all about connection with other people. And your 7th house is in Cancer. And so in terms of respecting that, it really goes to everything that Maybe was saying. It's about, showing your soft side, showing your sensitivity, showing, how tender you can be in reality, and how, soft you can be with people. And the fact that you've got moon in the 7th right now as well, and it's very close to where we think your ascendant is likely to be. I think that your moon is probably angular, which also suggests that this is a great year to be seen for your emotional self and for your feelings and for who you are, besides like this, this Martian projection that we often have to take on when we're going into the, dating apps. And then it's also very closely connected to your Saturn, actually, in the 2nd house, because the moon is trining your natal Saturn within 4 minutes, almost exactly. That's super, super impactful. It's also trining your natal sun, or your progressed sun as well. And then you also have Venus here on top of your progressed Saturn, and then, you've got this Venus-Vesta relationship again. But another piece that's also very interesting here is that in your progressed moon, you actually have in your solar return Chiron right on top of your progressed moon. And Chiron, again, has to do kind of with our core wounds, our core lessons that we've learned that are painful, that never really heal, but we turn it into a source of like advanced evolution. It is something that we're able to turn into a source of wisdom that we can use to teach others as well. So, and then the fact that you've got also your moon square in a cardinal sign, which is like a lot of energy for this year, it almost suggests that there's like a story here for you this year around building an awareness through sort of like the disciplined Saturnian work of your capabilities, of your skills, of your value, of all the things you have, because again, 2nd house, but it is tied intimately into a more sensitive expression of those things, or at least a contemplation of these Venusian and lunar themes of like, how can you, express yourself in a way that is attractive, that uses, this other side of you that has actually been there the entire time, but is only now kind of like really highlighted in being like, this is the time, this is the go year, for you to work through these sorts of things. How does that resonate for you?
On an abstract level, I think that sounds all well and good, but what does it mean?
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? What does it mean? What does it mean?
It matches my personality.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely am at my best when I'm able to express a kind of sensitive, nurturing energy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the big struggle I have now is actually in extending my social network out to be large enough to meet the people who I'm going to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's one thing to say you're at your best when you're sensitive and nurturing. Yep, I know. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to say, how does a kind of introverted person who's recently experienced a lot of, let's just call it social emotional trauma,
mm-hmm.
Heal from that and find a more extroverted kind of piece of myself again in order to make that connection actually happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Chiron in the 4th house suggests that there's stuff to be found in the realm of, your childhood, of your early experiences with family, with essentially, like the traumas that our family gives us. And it sounds like temperamentally you're pretty different from the rest of your family. So there may be a fair amount of stuff to work through there in that department. Like an Aries 4th house actually totally makes sense as well, because I did just did another consultation with an Aries fourth house person, and they're saying, yes, Aries fourth house, like the way I experienced it is the family was very competitive, always arguing, always fighting. Like it's all these Martian themes, you know, which I think is very telling in your chart that you've literally moved away from these sorts of, these sorts of expressions in a very intentional way. And with Chiron and the moon progressed there in Aries, it can suggest that you may actually find value in championing for yourself, but in a way that is not aggressive towards other people, you know, in a way that is a fighter on your own behalf. And that's all sort of tied into your family story related to the fourth house and sort of like, you know, the default patterns of interaction that you've developed over time that have worked for you, but probably no longer serve you at this point. But if we think about your actual literal question as well of like, hey, how do I, you know, do this in pandemic land where the only connection we really have is the internet, we would want to look at the 11th house of, you know, people, like literally just the group of people that you would probably address in terms of like a dating pool. And so you have, it is in Scorpio, you have Saturn, Venus, and Pluto there. And what this suggests is that demonstrating your competency, demonstrating your aesthetic value, demonstrating your incisive mind in public may be the way for you, because like Saturn, Pluto, Venus, and Scorpio, all those themes are those stuff. And you know, I feel like, and this is just my vibe because like the algo hasn't put you in my feed a ton, unfortunately, but like everybody I hear talks about you in a very complimentary way. Like Dan is an extremely deep thinker, very smart, has, you know, lots of ideas, lots of like passion and insight. And, you know, clearly people are able to see this from you on a friendship level and at an individual level. And so maybe it's just about like cranking that dial and like, you know, just primping a little more, or just allowing yourself to show off what you are and what you know, which obviously all that's much easier said than done, right? But you do have these planets in the 11th house, and you do have kind of this energy for this year where this may become a viable strategy for you.
Interesting thought. I spent the last, I want to say, 4 months-ish intentionally paring back my online presence to get it into a zone that was more comfortable for me. Mm-hmm. As it had sort of grown into a really large network of satisfying parasocial relationships. Mm-hmm. Or people who kind of knew me by reputation but didn't interact much with me, mm-hmm. or people who had interacted with me a bit and we just weren't vibing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm not the sort of person to want to keep a person in my sphere if we're not vibing. Mm-hmm. And I like took some deliberate steps on Twitter to kind of gently eject them. I unfollowed a lot of people. I asked people to unfollow me if they weren't really feeling me. Mm-hmm. 'Cause I've noticed a tendency where, especially in this sort of like in-group cozy corner kind of space, mm-hmm. there's a lot of like, I don't know how to say it. I want to be sort of delicate about my choice of words right now. There is a way that people relate to each other that seems to be not primarily based on actual affection or, you know, mutually supportive relationships. It has a lot more to do with a kind of aspirational desire to connect to people. Mm-hmm. And it felt very backward. It felt very backward to like assume that we might be friends and then try to figure out if we will be. It actually does work for some people, but I don't have that personality at all. Mm-hmm. I'm a little standoffish, a little prickly. Porcupine is one of my spirit animals. Mm-hmm. And so is Spider, for that matter. So the prickliness and also the sort of creepiness. Spiders are a great example too, because they're extremely good. They're really welcome animals to have around the home. They protect you from parasite-carrying mosquitoes and stuff, but they really kind of creep people out. They don't give off good vibes unless you've got that special kind of weirdness that I do. I like spiders. I have a spider plushie doll resting on my couch right now. Kind of guy who bows to spider webs when I pass by them on a walk. So I kind of get it. I kind of get that a lot of my energy is a little prickly and a little creepy. And when people are like kind of doing this aspirational, like, let's assume we're friends thing, it just bounces off me because they're gonna, like, what's the old joke? How do porcupines make love? Very carefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because my spines go out whenever someone rubs me the wrong way, and like, I don't actually think of this as a personality flaw. I think that a lot of people are very, very, very sensitive to getting poked. The only way they ever want to interact is nice, and if you give them a little pushback on something they said, even if it's not like super aggro or anything like that, it's just kind of disagreement. Like they'll think of you as a person they don't really want in their lives anymore. And like, I'm very assertive, very good at asserting boundaries. I'm very good at disagreeing without taking it personally, and I sometimes will do this as a kind of sport. Again, this is the family background of like an argumentative political Jewish family. And I have on many occasions run into people who are just good vibes only. They like, all they want is like love and light and that kind of stuff. And if I interact with them in a way that has even a tinge of negativity in it, they will no longer talk to me ever again under any circumstances. They'll stop liking my tweets. They'll stop retweeting anything I say, but they won't unfollow me. They won't fucking unfollow me. So I've had to push people to say, like, look, if you don't like me, if you like got turned off by me, just leave. Just, you're not doing either of us a favor by sticking around in this like now kind of tortured relationship. And it took me a lot of inner work to get the courage to do that. And I say this as a person who's generally comfortable with asserting boundaries. And this is one I wasn't comfortable with because in pandemic land, it was very, very hard to make friends in person. And I was wanting my internet relationships to be better and deeper and more satisfying than they had really turned out to be. So I just had to pare it back to the sort of core group of people that we really do vibe, we really do connect. They don't run away when they notice that I'm occasionally creepy and occasionally prickly. That's just my essence. It doesn't mean that I'm like hostile or dangerous. It's just my personality. And some people like it and some people don't. So trying to tighten those bonds to the people who actually do like me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
in the light of all of that, I'm really wondering, like, how do I kind of build that up into a more extroverted and connection-finding internet presence, which is absolutely what I had in, say, 2018, 2019. I was in that kind of mastery phase of that life cycle. The extroverted personality traits felt accessible to me. They usually don't.
Yeah.
Usually introvert.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because, like, all of the things... Well, actually, I've been talking a lot. Maybe. What do you have to say?
Well, I did see that you brought up something that I don't recognize on the chart, so I'm just dying to know what it is. So
yeah.
please, would you please...
So that you were talking about spiders a lot, and there's an asteroid called Arachne that I really like to bring up whenever people talk about spiders, because usually it is very strong in the chart, and you have it exactly trine your Saturn, which, you know, just makes sense that there's a very strong contact to something in your chart. Yeah, so that was it. It's also sextile to wherever your ascendant is. That also makes sense. You know, there's a big spider thing. So I was just curious about that.
Love the story of Arachne mythology, by the way. Arachne was a human woman who was such a skilled weaver that she exceeded the works of the gods. The gods punished her for this, as hate being showed up, and turned her into a spider and made her all like creepy and gross. But she kept her ability to weave.
Yeah. And, you know, the way that Arachne shows up in charts, or one of the interpretations, is also, it's both your literal interpretation, or both your literal relationship to spiders sometimes, but also it it will indicate if it's strong in the chart. It'll indicate an ability to see like very complex like plans and organization, and it's like weaving a huge web. That's what Arachne often gives us. So it suggests that in the realm of structuring things and building things, that's a particular talent for you. But coming back to the talk of relationships, I think that's very interesting because everything you said, I don't think is incompatible with putting yourself out there, because it really does feel like a super on point for a Pluto and Scorpio next to your Venus in the 11th house with your midheaven there and Saturn there. Like you're going to tell people how it is. You're going to tell people what you actually think, and like you are also going to set those boundaries. But at the same time, like parasociality isn't a bad thing so long as you're not suffering for it. And my understanding of how many relationships occur on Twitter is literally somebody was just following somebody for a while, then they are like, I like your deal, and then they just DM out of nowhere, and then something happens, So like my understanding is really that it's not even, it's your weak ties, not your strong ties a lot of the time that causes these relationships to arise. And so it can just be about continuing to feel very comfortable with how you use Twitter, but also don't be afraid to like flex your wisdom or your knowledge or whatever here and there, and whoever happens to be watching can happen to watch. And if they want to join your circle, then they can do that, and they can engage with you on your terms, or they cannot. I feel like that is a way that could potentially work for you given just what you've described.
Someone is sneaking up behind you, mate.
I know. It's okay. He just wanted to be a cameo, I suppose. That was the composer of our intro music. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Wei. Seeing Arachne, Venus, and Vesta all transiting your 11th house at the moment of the solar return chart is really interesting. It does just resonate with me in that, like, you are at your peak sexiness when you just go full hot goth girl and hold nothing back. when you're willing to be, the Tim Burton dream girl instead of everyone's dream girl, that's when I think you really shine. And I think there's a real invitation to be weird, and let the people who are attracted to that come to you, be the flame, and collect moths rather than trying to catch flies with honey, I think is something that really catches this kindness niceness distinction that you're pointing out. Mm-hmm. I think that niceness can be sweet and cloying like honey, and you're going to catch a lot of flies. But if you have real warmth, real kindness in your heart that you don't have to express nicely 100% of the time, maybe that's when you're going to draw to you some more substantial and interesting creatures instead of these little kind of people.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's definitely more accessible to me. I guess to extend the metaphor, after that kind of social emotional trauma, and then a year of consolidating and focusing on very I'm switching metaphors away from astrology into like elemental tarot style metaphors here.
Yeah,
very like earth element, pentacles suit kind of concerns. I feel like I've kind of got a grip on that now. I examine myself that this like fire element wands suit has been in. I haven't done it because I don't even need to. I can just look at my tarot deck and know exactly what card it's going to show me. It's going to show me a 10 of wands. That's it. It's going to be there right on the top of the deck, and it's going to smack me in the face and say, "You and I both know that you are really burnt out. How are you going to rekindle this, buddy?"
Yeah, and another card that comes to mind is the Eight of Swords, too.
Sure, of course. The whole world's been in a very Eight of Swords kind of a situation, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's for sure. I see how it connects for you. I like the 10 of Wands to 8 of Swords pipeline is short.
Yeah.
Oh, I love pipeline jokes. I never get tired of them. Cool. Well, we're a little bit over time. That's totally fine, but we should probably start wrapping up. So, Dan, maybe I'd like to ask, or is there anything else you'd like to ask about or comment on or reflect on as we're beginning to wrap?
I feel like I could keep going for another hour. This has really been great, very enjoyable. But yeah, I mean, we have to call it quits somewhere, so why not here?
Yeah. Okay, perfect. How about you, maybe?
Yeah, I think that you're so right that these episodes could all be 3 hours long, and we would just dig and dig and dig, and it would be delicious, and we would all enjoy it. But for Ways editing backlog's sake, we will we can cut it down here. And definitely, though, Dan, if you have any further questions about the year ahead, or the years behind, please DM Way and I. We would love to talk to you more about your chart. You're definitely an interesting little star being.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then that is a perfect place to wrap. Thank you so much for everybody who's tuned in and hung out to hang out with Dan and ourselves. Dan, thank you so much for letting us dig into your life again, peer a little bit at the
Happy
past
birthday.
and the future, and happy birthday. Yeah. Many returns. All right, y'all. We're going to end the stream right now. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.